Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Stone, the director of the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice at the Jacksonville Urban League. Imagine deciding to vote by mail, and you ask yourself, will it be counted? I've heard so many things. So let's find out from two of the greatest experts in town on this and nationally on this. And to introduce them, our speakers, I turn it over to Nick Shell, one of our interns at the center. Along with Nick is Dia Jawar, and also with us is Annalise Cedeno, and our coordinator of interns, Sadia Barge. So Nick, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. So to introduce our first speaker is Lanelle Phillmon. She is a native Floridian veteran and local activist. After graduating from high school in Sneads, Florida, she enlisted in the Navy and served for 27 and a half years, living across the U.S., Caribbean, and the Mediterranean before retiring as a Command Master Chief. And since 2012, she has worked with veterans and people experiencing homelessness in and around Jacksonville. Lanelle currently serves as president of the League of Women Voters of Jacksonville First Coast, voter registration chair of the League of Women Voters of Florida, secretary of James Weldon Johnson Branch of Association for the Study of African American Life and History, and president of the First Coast Tiger Bay. She also serves as the Duval County Election Advisory Panel and is an election day precinct manager in Duval County. She works with local and national organizations to effect positive change for all people, with most of her work centered on voter registration and voting rights restoration. Dia, if you would like to introduce our second speaker.
I'm so excited to introduce the second speaker, Sam Cooley. He's currently working as the campaign manager at All Voting is Local, and he has worked in grassroots organization for over 15 years and is a dedicated advocate for civil rights and community empowerment. Sam has spent over 7 years building a nonpartisan voting rights coalition in Jacksonville to advocate for expanded voting access. He worked to reopen on-campus early voting at Edward Waters University, Florida's oldest HBCU, and more recently, the opening of Dallas James Graham Branch Library. These programs address access gaps in Jacksonville's most predominantly Black City Council district, and while working with the Legal Defense Fund on visualizing where gaps in early voting exist, he is currently working with impacted residents to advocate for a new early voting site in South St. Petersburg. Sam's work is centered in collective action and empowering impacted communities to effect meaningful change on the local level. So thank you to both of our speakers for being here today, and I think we're ready to get started. Today's town hall will be covering mail-in voting and voter ID policies in Florida, with an emphasis on Duval County specifically. This will be a Q&A style event with an opportunity for audience questions at the end. So I think we're ready to get started, and I'll hand it off to Nick to start us off with the first question.
All right. So our first question is, over the last several years, Florida has made a number of changes to vote by mail rules and identification requirements. For people who may not follow election law closely, what are the most important changes voters should understand before the next election cycle? If Lanelle, if you would like to start things off for us.
I'm sure. So first off, I do just want to take a moment to say how much I appreciate you, Nick, and everybody who actually gave us this opportunity to do this evening. I do realize it stopped raining here in Jacksonville this evening, and a lot of folks could be doing a lot of other things, and yet you chose time to do this. So that says a lot to me. So I just want to say thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. So I just want to say about vote by mail. We're very fortunate here in the state of Florida that we have a no excuse vote by mail option, right? It means you don't have to have an excuse. And actually, every single registered voter in the state of Florida can request a vote by mail ballot. So just remind everybody, we're about to have a primary election in August, followed by the general in November. And these actually take place during hurricane season, right? So you never know if you're going to have to evacuate or, God forbid, we have damage to our homes, and now your priorities have focused, and you need to take care of your home, or something's going on in your community. But also, um, maybe you're having problems with your car, or transportation is an issue, or you have to travel for business. Maybe you're sick and in the hospital, or you've got a family member or a neighbor in need and you're having to attend to them. The beauty of this is you can request a vote by mail ballot, and you can have it just in case you need it, which is better than needing it and not having it, right? So, a lot of people plan to vote one of three ways, either on election day, which can be problematic depending on what kind of election it is and what's going on in the world, or during the early voting. But vote by mail, if you request your vote by mail ballot, it doesn't matter what's going on. You always have that as an option, right? For the identification portion, as I said, you have to be a registered voter. On the voter registration application, it does require that you have your Florida ID, or Florida driver's license number, or your last four of your social security number if you don't have the Florida ID. And the same is pretty much true for the the vote by mail request form. But in addition to that information, you would need to provide the address for the voter, where the voters registered at, but then also where you want that ballot mailed to. So imagine that you do have to travel for business, or you have to go take care of a loved one. You don't even have to be in town. You can get your vote by mail ballot delivered wherever you're going to be, and you can actually cast that ballot from anywhere. So the biggest thing is, as far as the change that's been made, we used to be able to request the vote by ballot about every 4 years after general elections, and now we have to request it after every general election. So if you wanted to vote by mail for the August election, you would have to request your vote by mail ballot by August 6th at 5 p.m. And then that vote by mail request would be good until the end of the year. But then, unfortunately, we all have to request a new vote by mail ballot come January 2027, because that's one of the changes in the law.
And I'll just jump in to add that I think that Jacksonville has a unique challenge when it comes to this vote by mail cliff. Specifically, Jacksonville has municipal elections for mayor, sheriff, all of city council, even our supervisor of elections, first on March 23rd, and then a runoff on May 18th. This gives us one of the shortest windows in the state of any county for voters to re-enroll and vote by mail. Which is part of why in 2022 we urged the Duval Supervisor of Elections Office to send all voters previously enrolled in vote by mail a notice informing them of their need to re-enroll for those elections. And I believe that was a contributing factor to 50,000 voters being enrolled in a matter of weeks for those March elections 4 years ago, but also just don't want to understate how enormous of a task it will continue to be for those upcoming elections. I also would just mention that, with the additional requirements of having a Florida driver's license number, or the last four of your social, if you renewed or replaced your Florida driver's license or state ID on or after July 31st, 2024, your ID number is likely changed, even if the picture looks the same. And that could actually present a problem when submitting a vote by mail request online, because the new number might not match your existing record. I only mention this because we are seeing across the state really steep declines in vote by mail enrollment. My understanding is in Jacksonville, they may be around 18,000 voters back on over a year after that cliff, again, compared to 50,000 when that mailer went out 4 years ago. The one last thing I just will, folks, because I used to be a big procrastinator. I, can't say I am not at all, but it's important to remember voters have to request that vote by mail ballot by 5 p.m. on the 12th day before election day to have it mailed to them for that election. But we actually recommend voters plan to turn in their ballots as early as possible, as ballots must be received by election day in order to count. And one of the primary reasons a vote by mail ballot won't count is because it doesn't get there by election day. So, again, while 12 days before the election is that statutory deadline, I strongly encourage anyone considering vote by mail to have sent off their ballot well before then. If you still haven't sent out your vote by mail ballot at that time, you can still drop it off at any early voting site, or you could just bring it with you and surrender it for an in-person ballot on election day. But it's no joke. We have seen margins in the past where the amount of vote by mail ballots rejected was larger than the margin between candidates.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Here, Dia, if you'd like to do the next one.
So the next question is, which communities rely most heavily on vote by mail in Florida, such as seniors, people with disabilities, or workers with irregular schedules, and how do these policy changes affect each group differently? Whichever of you want to start us off. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah. So, one thing that I want to just briefly touch on is that, yes, of course, it impacts a lot of different groups of people, but it does also really impact all of us. Earlier, if you just look at 2020's general election to 2024, there were 1.8 million fewer vote by mail ballots cast across the state. And again, we're seeing even more significant rates of decline in vote by mail enrollment this year because, frankly, we expect this unfunded mandate an additional burden on voters to continue to result in a decrease in vote by mail enrollment and participation across all ages, genders, races, ethnicities, you name it. And part of that is because we have a lot of challenges that affect all Floridians. The increasing frequency and severity of hurricanes in Florida, as Lanelle mentioned. We saw 5 major hurricanes during the 2022 and the 2024 general election cycles alone. Present significant obstacles that could hinder all voters' abilities to participate in the electoral process. But I do, again, think that there are specific groups that are most heavily impacted because vote by mail allows voters to avoid waiting in line during the heat of those August primaries, and again, to avoid inclement weather during an increasingly extended hurricane season. But that said, vote by mail, it's really a critical tool for voters with disabilities who face challenges to vote in person. Many organizations, such as churches, have historically helped voters with mobility issues, including older voters, by collecting their vote by mail ballots. Many Black churches, in particular, have historically employed this tactic during souls to the polls, but this was sharply curtailed by SB 90, which made it a misdemeanor for someone to have in their possession ballots other than their own ballot or a ballot for an immediate family member, or just more than 2 ballots from anyone. And SB 524 made it a third-degree felony for anyone to have more than those allowed ballots. And just regarding your question, when you're asking about workers with irregular schedules, these bills also limited ballot intake stations, formerly known as drop boxes, to being open only when early voting sites are open. It would be similar to an ATM only being open when the bank is open. One of the reasons our organization advocates for supervisors of elections to utilize the full 14 days of early voting and 12 hours per day is that those sites should then be open to ensure that voters with irregular working hours who can no longer use those secure ballot intake stations outside of the hours those sites are open may do so.
Thank you. Linnell, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, so I do want to say our supervisor of elections here in Duval County, Jerry Holland, has started, I think it's called Ready When You Are, is vote by mail campaign. He's trying to make aware of vote by mail and get people to request their vote by mail ballot, right? But one of the things is because they've created this administrative financial burden on the supervisors of the legislature when they pass the SB 90 bill that Sam refers to, they don't give them extra funds. They don't give them extra money. Are you still there?
Yep. Yeah, you kind of cut
Okay.
out there, but
Lost
yes.
my screen. Sorry about that. I lost my screen. But so it's an additional administrative burden on the supervisors of elections and their staff. The more times that people are interacting with our information, the more opportunities there are to get things wrong, to make mistakes. So there's that. But so our supervisor of election just did a mail out to people who had previously had a vote by mail request with the supervisor of elections and had not recently requested one for the upcoming elections. But imagine over 600,000 registered voters here in Duval County, and imagine that the only ones that are actually getting the reminder in the mail about vote by mail are the ones who previously had vote by mail. Also, keep in mind, we have a governor that's very proud of the fact that we've had a lot of people who have moved to Florida, pandemic and post-pandemic, right? We don't know what their voting styles or voting history was in the states that they've come from. And we don't know if they know that they have to request a vote by mail ballot here in the state of Florida or how that works. So there's just a number of things that go into this, but having to constantly request a vote by mail ballot after each general election is really just kind of cumbersome on the staff. And again, we have a lot of turnover here in the state of Florida, so you really don't know what voters do and don't know about how to participate in the elections with vote by mail.
And just to piggyback off that, I will really praise our Duval Supervisor of Elections. At our request, they put up a very detailed notice on the front of their about their need to re-enroll. One thing that we do see, though, is that supervisors have many things that need to be on their websites, and it's not always realistic to expect that one alert can be on the front of a website throughout an entire election cycle. And indeed, we often see that supervisors have to use their limited time to figure out when it's most opportune to front those notices, as to the many other notices they also need to relay to voters.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, just moving on. Our third question. Florida requires specific identification, both when registering and when requesting a mail-in ballot. Where do you see the most confusion among voters about voter ID requirements, and how can organizations like the ones that you two are part of help voters navigate those rules?
All right,
Um,
Sam, I'm gonna let you take this one first again, and I'll come in right after.
Yeah, I will uplift a tool from our partners at Vote Riders. They're really excellent because that's their explicit focus, is to help those individuals who need to obtain a Florida driver's license or a Florida ID, as that's overwhelmingly the most common form of documentary proof of citizenship. So I've just dropped into the chat the phone number 866-432-8683 for voteriders.org/free help URL. Anyone who's interested should feel free to reach out to them, as they help with the administrative costs of getting these IDs, which our organization has found can often be over $100 per individual.
So I just want to echo that. And I don't even know. At one point, I guess we'll have to ask Taylor and her team to tell us exactly what the use is of Vote Riders, because they do a lot of heavy lifting throughout the state of Florida, actually across the United States, but definitely here in the state of Florida. It's kind of interesting that they tell us how secure our elections are here in the state of Florida. I don't know if anybody remembers, but our supervisor of elections, I think, was on Fox News calling the election a little after 7 p.m. For President Trump here. And so we do a great job here in Florida. The former Secretary of State, Laura Lee, formally uplifted the election integrity here in Florida and how efficient we are. And yet it seems like every year when our legislators meet in Tallahassee, there are new changes. Now, is there a need to, kind of monitor what's going on with technology and changes that are taking place in the state? There are. The League of Women Voters is all about fair elections, secure elections. So we are all about election integrity. But we tend to come up with a lot of different things every year where it can be hard for the voter to actually figure out what changes have been made. I sometimes think of the voter as a pole vaulter. They've got their pole. They know exactly how high the bar is going to be. They get their running start. They put the pole in the ground, and then they get to the bar and they find out the legislature raised it. And you're like, what happened here? And at some point, we have got to do a better job. The state of Florida has to do a better job at educating the population about what is required of them to participate in their elections process, whether that has to do with voter registration, voter identification, vote by mail, marking ballots, election information itself, all of it. We have got to do a better job. We cannot continue to raise the bar without letting the jumper know, hey, you're going to have to get a taller pole because things are not working for us. But as far as voter ID goes, if you look at the voter registration application to be able to register to vote, it's pretty much the same whether you're doing the paper application or you're doing the online voter registration, which is register-to-vote-florida.gov. It requires either your Florida ID or your Florida driver's license number or the last four of your social security number. There's this whole thing about real ID. Is my ID the real ID? Do I have the real ID? Do I have the not real ID? And as Sam said, as they've begun to change the Florida driver's license and the Florida ID, it's caused some confusion. People don't know when they got their driver's license or if it's the right driver's license or Florida ID. And this can be confusing for people. But I do want to say our supervisor of elections is very responsive. I'm going to throw his phone number out there, 904-255-8683. You can call them anytime they're open, and you can ask any particular questions about vote by mail, voter ID, elections, just about anything. And they're a very responsive team, so we're very fortunate for that. But a couple of people who are being impacted by these changes and about this identification is the league tends to focus on younger voters and older voters. We have a lot of younger folks here in the state of Florida who are not getting driver's license. They don't drive. It's not something that they're focused on. And they've been very fortunate when they go to vote in person that they can use their student ID. I don't want to confuse people. I'm going to talk about something that's going to happen in January of 2027 when a new law comes into effect. But imagine now that they're not going to be able to use that to vote in person after January. And as you heard Sam say, we have elections coming up here very early in Duval County, and you have a lot of voters who will be going to FSCJ, Edward's University, UNF, JU, and they may or may not be aware that this has changed, right? So we are counting on our supervisor of elections and a lot of organizations to go do outreach to the campuses, and not just on social media, but actually go out to the campuses. But so we are encouraging everyone to get at least a Florida identification, right? So that you have that. But then also, we have a lot of seniors who, when they no longer drive, some may let their Florida driver's license expire, and they're not aware that you can't vote on an expired identification, right? So if they're going to give up their driver's license, we're encouraging them to get a Florida ID. Now, as you heard Sam say, we're very thankful to have vote riders, because imagine that transportation is an issue for you, or money is a barrier for you. Imagine if you've let your driver's license expire and you need to go get a Florida ID. You're not renewing anything that you had. Something is expired. So now you have to have that birth certificate to be able to get the new ID. I don't know if y'all know, but birth certificates are not free. And depending on where you were born and when you were born, that can be a process to get that. I had an elder friend who was in the hospital. While he was in the hospital, his driver's license expired. When he got out of the hospital, he went to renew it, found out he wasn't renewing because it was expired. He was a Korean War veteran. He was from a different state. He did not have the $75 to request the birth certificate that he needed now to get a new ID. So people were helping him out, but it shouldn't be that case. Money should not prohibit you from being able to get what you need to be able to vote in the state of Florida. But the other part of that is it took him 3 months to get the birth certificate. So imagine that this had happened right before an election. My friend would not have been able to vote as the laws are going to move forward here in the state of Florida.
That's actually a really unique story and like a perspective that I don't think I would have thought of. I didn't know it takes so long to get the birth certificate. But Thank you for the story. And then for the fourth question, um, Nick, if you mind changing the slide, thank you. So supporters of stricter voting laws they often argue that they improve election security. So, from your perspectives as voting rights advocates, how do you think the states can balance voter accessibility while safeguarding our elections?
Well, elections have been well safeguarded by trusted election officials in the states. This isn't about finding a balance between the two. What's been going on as these restrictive laws are being passed is far more nefarious. These laws are actually being implemented to keep people from voting and to control the outcome of elections. These laws aren't about security at all. They're about keeping people from voting to change the outcomes of elections. For anyone who needs reassurance about how our elections are run and to be involved in that aspect, there are excellent opportunities. I can personally attest, folks have found both extremely educational and reinforce their belief in the functioning of our democracy. We offer trainings on how anyone can monitor what happens at their local county canvassing boards, from the very first logic and accuracy meeting where they test equipment and determine unofficial results, through recounts and certification. All Voting is Local, working with Legal Defense Fund and Election Administration Project, would invite anyone volunteer canvassing board monitor if you'd like to learn more about the functions of our county canvassing boards, how they prepare for, again, recounts, audits, and those election certification challenges. And I, again, just bring all of this up because doing this has shown me just how noble and unvalued many of our election workers are, doing the essential process of, making sure that all of the things that we need to happen for these elections to, be conducted properly are done. It's a fantastic learning experience, which is why I'll drop the registration link in the chat.
So I just want to chime in and say, so election integrity, right? We like that word. We just had a bill passed, election integrity bill. Even though a lot of us don't necessarily agree with what that bill is focused on. But so there's different levels of election integrity. So there's voter registration. You want to make sure that you have an ensure and secure voter registration process to prevent fraud, and we have that, right? We have it. We give up our Florida ID, Florida driver's license number. We give up the last four of our social security number. So we have that. And then we have ballot security, and that's to make sure that we have measures to protect the ballots from being tampered with or unauthorized access. And I would tell you, as a precinct manager, I encourage anyone and everyone to go get trained as an election worker, so you can understand that those ballots are not coming into contact or in the custody of just one person. It doesn't happen that way. But also, you want to make sure that we have a transparent process to maintain an open and transparent election procedure that has public access. And what Sam is referring to for election protection, again, I would encourage you to volunteer for that. You get properly trained. You'll be able to attend the logic and analysis testing that's done before the election. You'll see the equipment brought out. You'll see how they go through and they test the equipment to make sure they'll feed ballots through it. They know exactly how many ballots are going in. They know exactly how the ballots are marked for the outcome of the test race. And they'll do that. But then there's also the canvassing board that Sam was talking about. You can get trained to monitor that. You'll see how the vote by mail ballots are handled, how the signatures are matched and verified. If somebody has a mismark or an overvote on their ballot, you'll see how they determine that. And then there's the audits that are done after the election. You can go and you can actually watch that process. And you can see the judge and the supervisor of election and whoever the other person will be. It's a city council member. I'm not sure who it's going to be this year, but you can be there, as Hamilton would say, you can be in the room where it happens, right? You can do that, right? But also to make sure that we have reliable methods for counting our votes and those audits when something doesn't seem right or not seem right, but when election result may be contested, it comes out very close. Access to voting, we want to make sure that people have access to voting, whether it's a person with abilities or disabilities. Everyone should have access to the ballot box in one way or another. And then we have that monitoring and oversight, which again is what Sam was talking about. whether it's independent observers from an outside agency or it's poll watchers from the political parties or the candidates. They have a right to be in the polling sites to actually see how the work is being done, or at the election center. They have all of that. So, in addition to all voting is local, we have like a coalition here in the state of Florida that's headed up by Common Cause. You can go to their website. You can volunteer to be an trained election protection person come election. But I would venture to say, in Florida especially, but I believe this is happening in other states, we don't have an election integrity issue. We have an election or a voter confidence issue. This is what I think we're actually dealing with. And unfortunately, what we see is there are people who are introducing and supporting legislation that would actually lead us to believe that there's a large number of ineligible persons who are casting votes in our elections, right? Whether these are persons who are not eligible because of citizenry or because these people are deceased. But so far, I would say that this has not been proven to be true. We do not have the proof that says that there are a large number of ballots that are being produced in somebody's garage somewhere or whatever and being stuffed into ballot boxes. And we just do not see the proof that deceased people are voting in mass, or that people who are not U.S. citizens are voting. And unfortunately, what we end up with is a lot of our legislature's time and a lot of our money as taxpayers is being spent to cause chaos, to cause confusion, and to really cost us a confidence in our elections and in our vote. So not sure if I answered the question, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, especially about how people can get directly involved with elections and how they can go from bystanders to participants in the whole election system, ensuring things are safe and secure. And on the topic of election integrity, I think the next question will be very relevant, especially with all the stuff that's going on in the news and the national media. But the question is, the proposed Safeguard America Voter Eligibility Act, also known as the SAFE Act, would require new standards for voting in federal elections. How would this proposal affect voter registration efforts in Florida?
So, Florida actually already has its own voter suppression bill that closely models that national bill we prefer to call the Voter Elimination Act. And it's most relevant, I think, to dig into this brand new law just passed for Florida voters, as regardless of the federal government, and as of now, I believe it's tied up in the Senate, but this law will affect Florida voters beginning January 1st. That said, there are no changes to voter registration, voter ID, or vote by mail for the 2020 elections. The voter verification process will come into effect in January 2027. It's much less likely to impact individuals who have a valid Florida driver's license or non-driver Florida state ID, which is a key difference between the new Florida law and the proposed federal Voter Elimination Act. But for Floridians, if you do not have a Florida driver's license or Florida state ID with a gold star in the upper right corner, which means it is a real ID, you may receive a notice from the Supervisor of Elections in 2027 requiring you to submit documents that prove your U.S. citizenship. If you receive this notice, you'll have 30 days to respond, and if you do not, you may be blocked or removed from the voter rolls. Also, if any individual's legal name is different from the name on the documentary proof, they must also provide official documentation providing proof of a legal name change, but the bill doesn't indicate what documents would be accepted. The bill also doesn't specify how individuals will be able to submit this documents, whether it's in person, by mail, or electronically. That remains unknown at this time. The following voter ID cards that had previously also no longer be accepted for voting in person or for carrying vote by mail or provisional ballots, including student identification, retirement center identification, neighborhood association identification, debit or credit cards, or public identification. Now, that said, the following IDs will still be accepted: a Florida driver's license, the Florida identification card issued by the DHSMV, a United States passport or passport card, a United States uniform service or merchant marine identification, veteran health identification card issued by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, a license to carry a concealed weapon or firearm issued, or any other identification card by any branch, department, agency, or entity of the federal government, the state, a county, or municipality, except identification cards issued by an educational institution. So the bottom line is this bill will keep Florida citizens from voting. It was designed to have electoral consequences, and the motivation behind them is power. If the goal is for everyone to have documentary proof of citizenship, and of course, driver's license are the most common form of documentary proof of citizenship, why then did Florida's Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles simultaneously stop allowing driver's license exams to be in any language other than English? Our partner organizations have filed two lawsuits the same day this bill was signed, and I think that's because while we aren't participating in them, in America, most of us believe voters should pick our leaders. And unfortunately, this bill was designed to keep people from voting, to control our elections, and seize more power. Most Americans want every voter to vote and every vote to be counted because we are the ones that are supposed to decide our leaders, choose our leaders, and ensure that the will of the people, not politicians, prevails.
Y'all have to forgive me. I get excited every time I hear Sam when he gets in that vein. And thank you for that, Sam. I just want to say, we kind of echo the Legal Women Voters echoes some of the information that the Brennan Center has actually shared. And this is a voter suppression bill. This is not. I know they like catchy titles, and save seems to be catchy, but that is not what it's actually doing. This is administrative chaos. So this puts an undue burden on American citizens. This is the most American thing that we do, right? We participate in our elections. We participate in our democracy. We elect people to go out and do the business of the taxpayer. But so this is an unnecessary and undue burden on American citizens, trying to create distance between them and voter registration, and definitely between them and the ballot box. But this also has the potential to disenfranchise millions of voters across America. We keep hearing, it's like half of the nation doesn't have a passport. And I don't know if y'all know, but traveling outside the United States can be expensive. And there's a little bit of a issue going on in America right now with things costing a lot. I paid $4.27 for gas yesterday. And that's a bit much. I was paying far less not long ago, but everything has exponentially increased as far as cost goes, right? So now, a lot of folks don't have a passport. I think it's 175, 179 bucks to get a passport, but in order to get a passport, got to get those other documents that can prove who I am. So this is shenanigans, right? We were just trying to get back to American citizens being able to register to vote and being able to participate in elections. But so we know, as Sam said, this targets certain folks in the nation, women. This is along racial lines, ethnic lines, as far as minority goes. People in rural and remote areas are going to be impacted by this. I also don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of offices have closed. Government offices have closed. In the small town where my mother lived, they've closed some government offices. We've seen Social Security offices closed. We've seen reduced opportunities for appointments to even get a passport at the post office or at other government offices. But this is really a voter suppression bill. It's not saving anything. It's definitely not saving time or money for American citizens who have to go out and do this legwork to be able to participate in our democracy. So nice catchy name, but it's really mislabeled.
Thank you guys both. And then now looking more deeper into each of your organizations and looking into the future, the next question is, what major projects or legislative developments are your organizations looking to implement in the future to strengthen voter participation overall in Florida?
Well, both of our organizations have joined a larger coalition advocating to increase access to the ballot box through the Florida Voting Rights Act. If enacted, that Florida Voting Rights Act would strengthen democracy by confronting voters being kept from ballot box and vote dilution that weakens or drowns out black and brown voters' voices, launching a pre-clearance program administered by a new independent Florida Voting Rights Act commission, expanding language access for voters with limited English proficiency so every voter can participate effectively, implementing a central public repository for election and demographic data with the goal of fostering transparent, evidence-based practices in election administration, establishing a paid holiday for Election Day, same-day voter registration, and automatic voter registration through the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, and protecting returning citizens from unfair prosecutions by creating a centralized database for returning citizens to determine voter eligibility, because we believe that it is unfair that as of now, we essentially have a poll tax where voters not only have to endure having completion sentence redefined as paying all their fines, fees, and restitution, but the state of Florida is hiding the ball and denying access to a statewide centralized database to confirm someone can know exactly what they owe. And the stakes aren't nothing. If you get it wrong, it's a felony. So the Florida Voting Rights Act is, we believe, a tool to address the way that Amendment 4 in 2018 was turned into a poll tax and to ensure that on a broad level we can expand voting. Additionally, our organization hosts a Defending Democracy mobilization call that connects locals with statewide and national partners responding to election crises. I'll drop the link for that in the chat. We also continue to host regional voting rights coalitions, including here in Duval on the first Mondays of each month at 5:30. We're co-hosting a block party this upcoming Saturday, April 25th from 12 to 3 p.m. at Fosse, Families of Slain Children at 2212 Myrtle Avenue North to celebrate the new early voting location we advocated to be opened at the Dallas James Graham Branch Library next door. And I'll drop a flyer for that in the chat as well.
Sam's got it going on. So the League of Women Voters, obviously, we're known for voter registration, right? And we don't just do it leading up to an election. Voter registration takes place with the League of Women Voters year round. We also do a lot of voter engagement, voter education about vote by mail. We've been helping people get their vote by mail requests submitted since the law changed. Excuse me. And we try to make sure that we plant seeds. So the people that we talk to, we don't just want to have a transaction with them. We don't want to just register them to vote, and we don't want to just get them to request their vote by mail. We want to empower them with information that they can take back to their church, their home, their community, their walking club, book club, wherever it is they go. We want them to take that information out into the community. And one of the things that we're really working on right now is the advisory opinion option here in the state of Florida. You heard Sam mention restoration of voting rights earlier. So in 2018, we gathered over 1 million petitions here in the state of Florida to be able to get a citizens initiative on the ballot, Amendment 4 at the time, to be able to restore voting rights to people who had a prior felony conviction, who had served all their time, unless it was something related to a sexual offense or murder, right? And we thought we were going to get about 1.4 million of our fellow Floridians' rights restored, people who'd had a prior felony conviction, but they had moved on, but yet they had lost their voting rights for life. So the bill passes. It was great. We were like, wait, we got 1.4 million people are going to get their voting rights back, only to see the legislature pass a piece of legislation called SB 7066. And it would go on to tell us, the Florida voter, that we didn't understand what we were voting on, and then drastically change what it took to get your voting rights back with a prior felony conviction. So then they said you have to have all your fees and fines paid. You have to do victim restitution, served all your time, community service, probation, everything, right? You're like, wow, just go ahead and set that bar high. Because a lot of folks who have a felony conviction often struggle finding employment. And when they do find employment, they can often struggle with finding well-paying employment. So imagine if you have a $7,000 fine that's outstanding, and then you tack on court fees to that. Imagine you're making 15, 16 bucks an hour, even though we fight to raise the minimum wage here in the state of Florida. Imagine now you've got a kid and you got rent or cell phone, car note, anything. It's going to be tough to pay that off. So that they set the bar pretty high. But either way, so there's this great organization, and Sam, I don't know if you can throw the address in the chat, but it's the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and this is an organization that has actually been helping people pay down their fines and fees, which is great. But now they've actually started helping Floridians who have a prior felony conviction with submitting to the Division of Elections what's called an advisory opinion. So sometimes you know your paperwork's gone between different courts. You know you've been paying off on things, but you're no longer getting a notice that you may owe a fine or a fee. Or your victim may have been a corporation or an organization. Let's say somebody steals an expensive laptop from a computer store. The victim in this case is not an individual, it's a business. And so you may not even be aware of what needs to be paid back as far as that goes. But so instead of trying to figure out on your own, which can be quite complicated, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition actually helps you submit what's called an advisory opinion. It's a request to the Division of Elections here in the state of Florida to ask them if they can tell you if you are eligible to register to vote. And so you may be told yes, they don't see any reason why you can't. You may be told no, that you still have outstanding things, and you may get a notification saying they're not able to rule on it because they just don't have enough information, or what have you. But even that in and of itself can be problematic. But so making sure that people with prior felony convictions know that they can submit for an advisory opinion is a big deal. Also making sure that they know about the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition so that they can get assistance with fines and fees and the advisory opinion is a big deal. And I just want to echo Sam on the Florida Voting Rights Act. We have seen so many changes made at the federal level to the National Voting Rights Act of 1965. We've seen, pre-clearance was a big deal. We lost pre-clearance, especially here in the South, for states who are known for having a negative impact for Black, African American, Hispanic, or non-white voters, also women, to have a negative impact on them as far as how we write election laws and how we handle voting and voter registration. You used to have to get or show changes in advance of making any changes in your local area to the federal government before you could make those changes. And now we've lost pre-clearance. And that's where you see these bills that are getting passed all over the United States, but especially here in the South, that are doing harm to American citizens. And a lot of it has to do with a political angle, and that's very unfortunate. People who want to represent voters, people who want to represent residents, community members, should fight very hard to get out in the community and listen to their community and find out what the needs of that community are, and then work with other people to develop solutions and go out and win those votes and earn the trust of the people in their community. Instead, we have redistricting that's about to take place, special session April 20th through the 24th in Tallahassee, where people will actually decide who the candidates' voters will be. And so the voters getting to determine which candidates they want, the opposite will be taking place. So this is all bad. So the League of Women Voters will be there, as will All Voting is Local, and a number of great organizations are going to join us, especially April 20th in Tallahassee. We'll have a rally and some other things going on. But we're just really trying to get out and educate the public about why redistricting, especially with no new census data, is problematic, and what's actually happening here in the state of Florida with the line drawn, especially for the congressional districts.
Thank you so much for sharing. So I think this is the end of our questions, and I know we only have a few minutes left, but we're going to open it up to audience questions. So if anyone has anything they want to ask our speakers, please feel free to unmute and go ahead.
I had a comment because we only have 5 minutes left. I'd like to provide some context, and it's has different facets. I think the most important one is in Lanelle's case, she represents a nonpartisan group that for decades and decades has been doing nothing but helping people become a voter. No matter what their party, no matter what their race, religion, and yet the situation has gotten so dire that they have to be very obviously it's hard to not put it this way, but somewhat partisan in their response because of what has happened. And some context. This is on a Jacksonville Urban League YouTube channel. Okay, so we have a large population of urban leaguers, and the Urban League was created during Jim Crow to help people with things like voting. And the fact of the matter is, even though blacks are only 17% of Florida, 47% of prisoners, felony prisoners, are black in Florida prisons. So that means that almost a majority of the people coming out of prison are running into this problem and not being able to vote. So it's not just it's a problem for people that are felons. And if you go back to the history, felonies were created in the southern states to prevent blacks from voting because white people would never be arrested for a felony. They say, oh, no problem. Drive more carefully. But if you were black, you'd be charged, felony, no vote. And we're only one of 4 states left that does this yet. Like you say, overwhelmingly, the people of Florida voted. I remember the person that was pushing for it came to the law school where I was dean and made the pitch, and it was wonderful to see the vote that came afterwards. And yet, where did it leave us?
Yeah. If I may, Dennis, I do want to say that the question on the voter registration application here in the state of Florida was not always there. So after the passing of the 14th and 15th Amendment, freed black men were able to register to vote, and they did. And then we see, something that Florida also has a great history of, this reapportionment and redistricting. So as soon as free black men are registering to vote and able to participate in elections, then they begin to draw districts to dilute their vote and take away their voting power. So if they couldn't keep them from voting at the ballot box, they diluted the value of their vote at the ballot box. Yeah. But again, and you are very right, they began to create the felony conviction for a number of things, especially here in the South. And then they create this barrier that says if you have a felony conviction, you can't register to vote. And that really was targeted at the black community here in Florida.
And so another important aspect, a facet of this presentation, is that it sounds, you didn't sort of just go from, well, here's what the statute says, and and then ultimately get to the impact. You just went right to the impact because it is serious. And again, we're talking to 2, what I would say, nonpartisan people who are just trying to do the right thing. And yet they have to reach this level because things have gotten so bad. And you have to carefully listen to what they're saying. Again, I'm talking to the YouTube audience now, because despite the urgency of their voices, it is real. And one thing, if it doesn't get you that 47% of those in prison are black, all of you women out there who got married, changed your name, there are millions of you who will be denied registration at wherever you go to register if you don't have proof that your name on your driver's license or whatever you use, you'll have to get your, I suppose, your marriage certificate to show that that's how your name was changed. I mean, it's just amazing how much this is going to impact people, and I frankly think it's going to hurt those who've been pushing for it to happen. Anyway, I'm sorry to take so much time, but this was a way of thanking you for what you're doing because it's so significantly important for us. And I'll leave it open to any other questions that might be out there.
can I make a closing comment if you don't mind?
Sure.
Because I realize that this is going to hit different people, but I see a lot of young people on the screen that I'm looking at. So, the league hopes that you won't just register to vote and turn out and vote, but we actually hope that you'll seek out the candidates that are running for office, right? We want you to ask them tough questions. We want you to ask questions that are important to you. So, I'm a little older. I'm getting ready to retire. I still work, but I'm getting ready to retire. I'm a homeowner. I have my degrees. I'm retired from the military. I have a certain level of health care and benefits. But maybe you're in a different situation. Maybe you're a little younger. Maybe you're still renting or you're thinking about owning a home. You're starting a family or you already have a young family. But what is life going to look like for you when you get to my age? So I hope that you'll ask those candidates those tough questions, find out, what they're willing to do to represent you, make sure that they understand what your particular needs are. And then I want you to think about this. If you can't find a candidate who represents you and your family and your community and your needs, I want you to
Run
think
for
about running
office.
for office. Um, I'm serious.
Yes.
You know, if you look at lack of term limits in Washington, D.C., and you look at the age, and you look at the number of millionaires in the Florida legislature, I don't think we're all having the same lived experience. And so I'm not saying that in jest. I'm saying that for real. If you can't find someone who represents you, your family, your needs, and your community who's not willing to listen to you, maybe your name needs to be on the ballot.
Other questions? Well, on behalf of the Jacksonville Urban League, I want to thank you for being our guest this evening. And I wanted to thank our interns. And by the way, Nick and Dewa, any concluding remarks on your part?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. And I think, as far as I go, I think this was really, really informative. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this.
Yeah, just a quick thank you for your sharing your expertise and your continued work on behalf of all Florida voters. So thank you.
Yes,
If
again, thank you very much. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, I just want to say again, thank y'all for having us. And I'd just love to close by telling y'all a little bit more about that upcoming event I mentioned and part of why it's really important. Our Duval Voting Rights Coalition first established as Let Duval Vote back in 2019. And part of why we're promoting the recently opened Dallas James Graham Branch Library, including that community block party Saturday, April 25th from 12 to 3, is because when we worked with community leaders and data analysts to identify and address gaps in voting access, following a 2023 lawsuit that forced equal election day sites across each city council district, that analysis showed District 10, which, as I'm sure you all probably know, is overwhelmingly Jacksonville's most black city council district, with over 80% of residents identifying as black, was the same district that experienced the steepest losses, with the elimination of 7 of its 19 election day polling sites, all of which served majority black precincts. The loss of the Joseph Lee Center's early voting site only compounded the reduction in voting access. And while I know much of tonight's conversation focused on vote by mail, Jacksonville residents like to vote early in person. Of any Florida county, Duval has consistently had some of the highest rates of early voting in person. In 2020, early voting in person was over 53% the voting method for Duval voters. And in 2024, 60.2% of Duval voters chose to vote early in person, more than twice the statewide average of 29.5. But for too long, black neighborhoods have seen early voting sites open quietly and close quickly, only for the community that then get blamed when turnout is low. We saw this with the closure of Edward Waters University's on-campus early voting site in 2018 after massive community pressure. 91% of the voters that used Edward Waters early voting site in 2018 were black, but it took 6 years to get that site restored. When it was once again 90% black voters who utilized it. Unfortunately, it's just something that we've seen when sites are closed in Black communities, such as Gateway Town Center, which in 2020 was used by over 5,000 voters, over 78% of whom were Black. It was replaced with another site, the Joseph Lee Center, and then that site was again shuttered after a single cycle. Time and time again, early voting sites are replaced, reduced, and removed from communities that need them the most before they have time to get used to any one site, which again is why we made a point to advocate for the Dallas James Graham Library to become an early voting site. And I just want to close by saying that opening a site, it's not the finishing line. Keeping those sites open means ensuring the community knows about the site, uses that site, and then defends them. Frankly, it requires that we build community awareness and ultimately a high enough turnout so that the site can remain open. And that is part of why I will just close by sharing with folks nonpartisan push cards that anyone can use for educating voters in surrounding neighborhoods about the opening of these sites. Again, to ensure the community utilizes them and they can remain open for future elections. Thank you all again for having us and your indulgence in this last plug.
Thank you so much. Again, on behalf of the Jacksonville Urban League and the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice, thank you, and we hope to have you back after some experience, maybe after the midterms, and see what's going to happen going forward. So thank you.